The Y Curve with Phil Dobby and Roger Hearing.
Whatever happened to the future?
Millennials were supposed to be the luckiest generation. Healthier, fitter, better educated than any before.
But instead, they can't buy a house, they're squeezed on rent and shopping bills, and they're more miserable.
Plus, we're handing them a planet horribly damaged by climate change.
Well, triple lock pensions and high-value housing means the older generations are mostly comfortable and using up the kids' inheritance.
So how did it get so unequal between generations?
And what can be done to fix it?
The Y Curve.
You know, there's two arguments on this, isn't there?
Only two?
Well, there's many arguments, but the two key ones,
Yes.
it boils down to young people saying, well, you know, we're burdened with all the debt and all those people who had it so easy before us and we've got it tough.
Yes.
And I remember my dad saying, you know, his generation had it a lot easier than ours. It seems to have had it easier than the next generation. And then there's the other argument that says, well, you know, if they only just worked a bit harder and showed a bit of dedication, then
less
maybe they'd get
avocado
on.
toast.
Yeah, exactly.
It would all be fine. These snowflakes, they don't know they've got it made. They're
I
concerned
think
about
there's a
their
bit
mental
of.
health.
I'm prepared to accept that there might be a bit of both.
No, well, I don't. I think actually the people don't change that much. I think they are in a much worse position just as far as the opportunities that they've got and how much they have to pay for them. But also, it's a huge wealth thing because, you know, at one end there are people who are doing very nicely, thank you, whose parents are paying for everything or whatever, and they're getting into the right job, so they've got the right connection.
And then there's those who don't.
And those who don't. And that was always the case.
And I don't get the economics of it. So the idea that we'll say, well, okay, if you're going to go to university, it's great for the university sector. I mean, the university sector has done very well out of the idea that everyone's paying because there's many more people going to university now and they can charge more for the courses and we're seeing, you know, more money going into that sector. So great for the sector, not necessarily very good for those people. Yeah. And so, but also the fact that you're then riddled with the
huge debt forever,
and that huge debt is money that you are pulling out of the economy because you're repaying debt rather than spending it in the economy. So how do you get economic growth if no one's got any bloody money to spend?
Well, the pensioners have plenty of money.
Well, okay.
That's
not what we're talking about.
But that is the point because it's the balance between the two. Yeah. That's the problem. Not that everyone's poor. It's the balance.
Does it have to be that? I mean, can't the old people sort of like, you know, live a comfortable existence and have enough money to be able to support the younger people?
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But is it possible?
It's only a question of money.
Let's pick that question up with someone who knows, who's Liz Emerson, CEO and co-founder of the Intergenerational Foundation, which is an independent charity promoting intergenerational fairness. And Liz joins us now.
So, Liz, I guess, the obvious place to start is, because it always comes up with young people, house prices. Just the fact that the house price to earning ratio, I'm looking at figures from Nationwide, they're saying it was 3 in 1995. So a house would cost 3 times your earning. Now it's 7 times. I mean, and, you know, it seems like it's just become an impossibility, particularly if you're on your own, to be able to get a house.
Absolutely. And that's 7 times outside London. If you're inside London, it's something like 13 to 15 times. Yeah. I mean, the point is, and this is where kind of intergenerational fairness and ageist policy comes in, quite frankly, is that parents and grandparents are only just beginning to get just how bad their children's and grandchildren's futures are going to be. And the main reason for that is the inability to be able to afford a roof over their heads. And for too long, young people have been derided for being the latte generation, for not being thick-skinned enough, for not working hard enough, for not being able to save enough, for frittering their money away.
Spending it all on avocado toast, I think.
Exactly, spending it all on avocado toast. And the reality is that the average young person is having to put aside more than 2/3 of their weekly expenditure just on rent. They can't even afford their auto-enrollment contributions. I mean, they're in negative savings most of the time because of the cost of living crisis. And there's this kind of generational morality coming down the generations to young people, basically saying, well, you're not working hard enough. If you worked as hard as our generation, you'd be able to do all the things that we can do. And this is where we need to go back to thinking about generational analysis and go back to population pyramids and explain why we've got into this sorry mess.
Well, why have we got into it? Because, you know, I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time. I was just looking it up, the famous book by Lord Willits, The Pinch. About 15 years ago that came out, how this generation, the boomers basically stole the millennials' funds effectively and living off them, and it's all very unfair. But nothing much seems to have been done. But was it only at that point that anyone became aware of this?
That's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, can we just set the scene a little bit? I mean, the thing is, the big thing that Willett says in his book, that basically larger cohorts of people that are born at the same time, as they move through a welfare state, they take the spending with them. And this is what's happened with the boomer generation, who, that we say were born between 45 and 65. Now, if we go back and we think about how they've moved through life, they had to expand maternity services for them. They had to expand primary education for them. They had to expand secondary education for them. Housing had to be built for them. And they've gone through life being a much bigger cohort than other cohorts, such as Generation X, which is me, I hasten to add. I'm a little generation that's come behind them. And so there are expectations of entitlements within a welfare state system that has this kind of universal safety net. Now, over time, that safety net has had to change because of a multitude of reasons, which has meant that as our country has got poorer, the welfare state has pretty much retreated from anybody under the age of 55. Everybody's means tested, whether it's housing benefits, whether it's student loan maintenance grants, even child benefits,
It's increasingly becoming a user pays type scenario, which defeats the purpose of the government stepping in, doesn't it? But is it? I mean, by the way, just so we're all clear on this, I'm a boomer, so's Roger, but I'm only by a year. I snuck in. I was one of the last of the boomers.
He's a very young boomer.
He's a young boomer. Okay,
but all this,
thank you for declaring that, both of you.
I like to be upfront, but all the stuff that you're saying about all of this provision that had to happen to satisfy the needs of this generation. Yeah. I mean, those extra houses, that education, etc., that could all still been there for the next generation, particularly if there was a smaller proportion of people in that generation within that age group. Absolutely. But my point in my question is, isn't it actually really a political decision that no, we are going to go down the user pays type road rather than what had been a more mixed economy type approach that we grew up with?
Yes, to some degree, but the other elephant in the room here is, and this is where it gets very tricky, is the welcome but rapid aging of our population. So where in the past we had a population pyramid where we had lots of younger workers and a few older people that needs to be supported, hence, through our state pension system, that population pyramid has kind of been turned on its head. So we've got far larger numbers of people who are going to be living longer. Great news. But the average, and here it all gets a bit depressing, the average over 65-year-old is going to be living with 2 or more chronic illnesses. The NHS is going to need to spend more. Social care systems are going to need to spend more. Where does that money come from? Now, at the moment, that increasing tax base is falling on younger working age people rather than falling more equitably across all generations, irrespective of age. Does that make sense?
But they are the ones who are earning. They're the ones, we would say people who've reached retirement age. They may have a pension, but they're not generating income. So their capacity to pay for what they need is pretty limited.
Hang on a moment. How many people over 65 have we got in this country? We've got about 11 million, 12 million. How much wealth does that population own? Something like 2.5 trillion out of the overall housing wealth of 2.7 trillion. They've also got the last remaining final salary pensions. And if research back in 2023 found that 1 in 4 over 65s are living in a household which is worth 1 million quid. So that idea of all people over a certain age are poor is no longer holds true. We know that pensioner poverty has fallen from 30%. It fell down to around 15%. It's creeping up at the moment. But actually, it's children and young people who are the new poor in this country. And our welfare system hasn't caught up with it, nor has our politics, I hasten to add.
So it's a question of timing, isn't it? Because, I mean, when I die, because I don't know how my kids are going to manage or how I'm going to manage helping them through university either, is another point. But when I die, which might not come soon enough as far as they're concerned, they'll inherit a house. My wife will probably get it first. But when we're both gone, they'll inherit a house. They'll probably inherit quite a bit from my brother as well. He's not married. So down the track, they're doing all right. But they will have established themselves in their career. They're not getting it now, which is when they need it. So it's a time. It's not the cash isn't there, it's the timing, isn't it?
Well, you're talking about the bank of mum and dad, and for those people that are lucky enough to get an inheritance, actually the average age of receiving an inheritance in this country is now in your late 60s.
Yes, it's a bit late.
Young people and that's because of welcome increasing longevity. It's great news that people are living longer, but the wealth distribution flows that used to happen more frequently, i.e., earlier on in life, they are not happening anymore. And so one of the things that IF has been calling for and other organisations have been calling for is means to help people to release their wealth during their lifetime as well as after they die. The problem with that is it's going to exacerbate intra-generational unfairness, i.e. inequality, within younger generations to come.
Well, I was going to mention that because it seemed, it's regressive in a way because, yes, there is a lot of wealth tied up in the elderly, but not universally. And, you'll be having what you'll mean is people who come from a poorer background. And if you look to that generation, the boomer generation, one of the big things there was people bettering themselves, coming from poor backgrounds, but ending up educated and in middle class professions. And now you have a situation in which the people who come from a poorer background have absolutely no chance of getting out of that because they don't have the bank of mum and dad. Mum and dad don't have a bank.
Well, two words: wealth tax or land tax. If you're old and you hold a lot of assets, then pay more tax. If that means that you might have to sell the house, maybe there has to be a way of adjusting for that. But if you've built up a great deal of wealth and it's just going to get passed on too late, when your kids are 65 and your kids might not need it, there's got to be a way of taxing older people, surely, in a way that's not going to hit income, but it's going to be based on the wealth they've accumulated.
Absolutely. And we just launched a report calling for a wealth tax. And I think our statistics are that it would only affect 1% of the population on wealth over 2 million quid, whether that was housing or pension wealth. But it could raise, our estimates are really conservative and they were done before the pandemic because of the way that the Wealth and Assets Survey runs. But the estimates run from around 18 billion a year to around 23, 24 billion a year. However, if you also taxed unearned income from shares in the same way as you taxed earned income, that could raise something like 30 billion. There are ways. Now
that used to be the case. In fact, I think that was the case under Margaret Thatcher, wasn't it? That who's hardly a lefty, that you paid the same amount whether it was wealth or earned income. It was.
But we're not absolutely. But we're not saying that all young people are going to run off with this money. What we're saying is, within an aging population, where of course you want to look after the elderly in society, where there is a cost attached to that, surely the intergenerational solidarity has to go down the generations as well as up the generations. And therefore, we're asking older, wealthier people to contribute a little more to their own social care needs and the cost of their national health services and their pension promises, rather than constantly passing the bill down to younger generations to pay.
This isn't going to happen, though, because politically, one of the big problems, I think, certainly by my reading in terms of the intergenerational problem, is that old people vote. And old people are turn out for doing these things. And in our democracy, that gives them power. That's why we have the triple lock pension, because the government, and this is true of Labour governments as well as Conservatives, know that that is where they will actually get political power from. And they are not going to turn around and penalise that section.
You're absolutely right. I mean, yes, old people do vote, and old people seem to be voting for themselves and not in the interests of their children and grandchildren, which we think is obviously unfortunate. And yes,
like Brexit, for example.
Absolutely.
Where, what was it? Something like 75% of young people were for Remain.
Absolutely. Actually, but you know what? The highest indicator for Brexit was actually education level. Yeah. It didn't matter where you came from, but it was your level of education, whether you voted to Remain or not. But let's go back to the grey vote. The grey vote. She's
saying Brexit voters are stupid.
Well, no. Let's just not go there. Please, God, let's not go there.
Now, as a parent of two young adults, I am mourning the fact that they are unable to work in other countries and have the freedom
of tragedy
that I had when I was younger. Yeah. So I think there is an intergenerational intergenerational unfairness there. But can we go back to the grey vote? Because do remember, when you're speaking to people in their 20s or their 30s, they got absolutely stuffed over tuition fees. And let's go back to David Willett, shall we, who wrote The Pinch, who said, oh dear, we're all doing wrong for young people. What did David do under his watch, you two?
Well, he was universities minister, wasn't he?
And what did he do when he was universities minister?
Raised the price of getting a degree.
He tripled tuition fees. He tried to create this ridiculous market of higher education where all the universities and higher education institutions were all going to compete against each other and the money was going to follow the student. I'm sorry, none of that has happened. He got a bloody nose when nearly every institution immediately rushed towards £9,000 a year tuition fees. Then those universities have gone on a massive spending spree. We have vice chancellors paying themselves 600, 700,000 in remuneration a year through pay and perks. We've got Louise Richardson, the former university's chancellor for Oxford University, making us try to believe that university chancellors were like the International Football League. And somebody needed to say hang on, you're supposed to be charities. Have you forgotten this? You're not businesses, whether you like it or not. Meantime, the victims are the students that are leaving university with £50,000 or more in debt, who were promised a graduate premium, which has largely been eroded for most. Yeah. And 1 in 5 recent graduates are in non-graduate jobs. Sorry.
So there's two things. No, that's you go for it. Really loving the passion.
I get really angry about this. Yeah.
I mean, you are sounding a little bit ambivalent about it, but we get the general direction. Yeah. But I mean, there's two things on that. First of all, yes, there's the fact that they're going to university and they're being landed with this debt, which, as you say, is probably not going to pay back for them because they're not going to see it in terms of higher wages, which then raises the question, why did you go to university in the first place? Because those boomers didn't, by and large. So there were, in 1950, for example, there were 17,300 students taking their first degree and another 2,400 getting a postgraduate qualification. Very few people went to university. Yeah. Now we've got almost 3 million people in higher education. So there's so maybe 1 million in one year doing a degree. Yeah. And they're doing. You can do surf science at the University of Plymouth, which I'm sure they make a lot of money out of. I'm sure there are people who won't make a great deal out of that degree at the end of it, but it's been marketed at them. So the whole system has broken in that way, in that it's not serving the student, and too many people going to university when they don't need to.
But it's even worse than that. Did you know that the top 10 wealthiest students that go on to higher education in the UK aren't even in the student loan system? And the reason they're not in the student loan system is because they pay up front, mummy, daddy pays their living costs, and so they escape that 9% graduate tax in orbit name that they will be paying back over a threshold for the next 30 or 40 years. Now, there is a really uncomfortable conversation that we need to have in this country, which is it is the poorest students who will be paying back the most for the longest period of time. And is a higher education is a higher education what we should be sending all students into? And I'm often asked this question. And of course, what we need is a rounded higher education system. That means that brings us the future musicians and artists and authors and the creative industries that also really contribute to our country. GDP. Thank you very much. Not everybody has to be bloody STEM.
Well, even if it doesn't contribute to GDP, even if it doesn't contribute to GDP, it adds to the wealth of the country, whether it's monetary wealth or not.
And also, there are things worth doing for their own right, not necessarily where they actually are just purely based on.
What was your degree in, Roger?
Oh gosh, classics and history.
There you go. No, but I mean, we fully believe an education should be a public good. We actually think that the current system is broken. We do think that higher education should be fully funded, and we should be investing in the educations of younger and future generations, especially as we are moving on to new systems, the imposition of AI, and of course globalization. However, there should have been. And I do not understand why there cannot be a separate, highly respected gold plate apprenticeship system.
Yeah.
Well, this has been talked about a lot.
So I'm glad you went there before I asked you the question about it, because I was exactly where it was going to take us. So you can get apprenticeships, of course.
Yes.
If I wanted to take on, I'm a small business of one person, and if I thought, well, okay, I want to take on an apprentice to show them the art of podcast making, that long
by introducing them to me, but that's another story.
And I could get a grant from the government. I could get £11,400. I looked it up. I could get £11,400 from the government to take an apprentice to go to a registered training provider who would get that £11,400 to teach them about the business that I could teach them about while working on the job, but instead I have to get a third-party trainer to take that money. So that just seems a bit cockeyed to me. What about the idea that, if you don't go to university, you get a job as an apprentice, the government provides the support, you get on-the-job training, and, for a year's commitment? I mean, does that sort of thing happen?
I mean, listen, I'm not an expert in this area, so I can't really comment in depth on that. But the uncomfortable truth is that wealthier, better educated, in apostrophes, middle-class kids will keep going onto university until the system changes. Now, here's a really interesting thing. Within accountancy, I think in banking and in a few other sectors, the middle classes have twigged. And they are sending their kids to do degree apprenticeships within all of these companies. So I think times are changing. But
there's a parity of esteem issue which is beginning to change. That an apprenticeship is not seen as necessarily a social downgrade.
And if there's this focus now, which there seems to be, on more vocational degrees, then that is actually taking the responsibility away from the employer and making the government or the individual pay for it. So there used to be. So I remember the old days of the milk rounds. Do you remember the milk rounds at university?
I do.
I wonder whether that was still a thing. So I typed in milk rounds, and milk rounds jobs, and all I could find was
a job on a milk
as doing a milk round. So obviously it's not a thing that goes on.
Do you know what that says? Do you know what that says more than anything else?
Says the internet wasn't around.
No, it says more about your age than anything else.
Yeah, I know
it does.
Yeah, but it's not as old as Roger, though, because I am just in the baby boom, just in case I didn't mention that before. But I remember one of the standout ones was Mars. Everyone wanted to get on the Mars management training program because they would move you around to different points. You could get to eat chocolate, but also they took you on. You had to get a good degree, and they take you from one part of the business to another, and then you find out where your strengths lie. And then you probably work for Mars. The idea, I guess, in those days was that you'd work there for the rest of your life. So I looked it up. It's still around, the Mars Leadership Program. You do 3 different 12-month placements. You get paid £33,000 a year starting salary, which isn't bad, is it? If more companies operated like that and said, well, actually, we'll invest in the youth. We won't just take people for a year and take them on. We'll take them on and we'll let them grow with the company.
Would they do that? That's the question.
Well, it's got to work both ways, hasn't it?
Well, and then we've got another issue, haven't we? We've got an issue about the labour market and who has access to the labour market and what benefits and protections do they have within that labour market. And of course, what the boomers haven't had to deal with, but what younger generations have had to deal with is the rise of the gig economy and the 0 hours contract, which is where, you could argue that the power has moved too far in the direction of employers. And power has been removed from younger workers to some degree. So you could have a younger worker on a contract sitting next door to a older colleague who has full-time protections, ill health, pension contributions, but that younger worker hasn't got any of those rights. So if they fall ill, they are losing income. So it's I suppose I kind of want listeners of this podcast to understand just how the cards are stacked against younger generations.
Well, I think a lot of people understand. A lot of people do understand that, and then if you do the sums, if you try and put yourself in the position, which again I did, I thought, well, okay, I've got my first job out of university, or a couple of years down the track, perhaps. Actually, a few years, because I worked on £45,000, which for most kids would be, starting out would be a great deal. I thought, I'm going to get a one-bedroom flat in Holborn. What can I get that's halfway decent? £2,800 per month. I thought, okay, 45,000 after tax. That's 35,000. I'd have to pay back 4,000 of that on my student loan, so that leaves 31,000. That's £2,500 per month. So I'm paying 2,800 rent. So I've got £300 left to spend for nights out. More than enough for anyone. I mean, you do the sums like that, and that's on a good salary. It just doesn't work. You'd have to find a girlfriend who's quite well paid to share that rent with you.
Who has a rich mum and dad, possibly, even.
Who doesn't mind the fact there's only one bedroom in the flat.
The thing with all this, Liz, is, we're all singing the same tune. We all think that this situation is wrong. And you, as a group, your organisation and others, have put out these pleas for changes, whether it's to the tax system or the education system. Are you getting any traction? And particularly, I'm thinking, we're all assuming potentially a Labour government will be in place perhaps by the beginning of next year. Are you getting any traction on this? Because we go back to that problem of the vote being with the elderly. And Labour has been very keen not to make huge promises, of course, in these sort of areas. But are you, when you go and talk to these politicians, do you get any traction on any of this stuff you're saying?
Well, isn't it interesting? Behind closed doors, every politician that we have spoken to, from whatever end of the political spectrum, wrings their hands with us and goes, I know, Liz, it's terrible what we're handing on to younger and future generations. But tell me, Liz, how am I going to sell that on the doorstep? And they hide behind this idea that the voters are the people that they answer to. And so it's, we're in a situation where we need the voters of whatever age to be voting for the long term and not in their self-interest. So I know you want me to go on about the politicians, but the voters also, we all have a responsibility ourselves, if we care about the future and the future of our kids, to vote for those policies that may well not enrich us as much as we would like, but actually help to make the country more stable, more environmentally friendly, reduce carbon dioxide, increase jobs, increase housing for younger and future generations. I know I'm avoiding why aren't young people voting? And I think, we have to go back to the way that the Lib Dems let young people down in 2010. And I don't think they've ever recovered.
This was on tuition fees, where they changed the tack because of the being part of the coalition.
Yeah.
So there's two issues on there. There's the one issue about how much those nasty generations that have gone before, how much debt they've laden us with, which we'll look at in a second. The other one is just how do you get a job and get a start in life, and university might not be the answer for lots of people. And I talked about examples like Mars, and two laws you could pass. One is to say, well, okay, we're going to abolish 0 hour contracts. They're illegal from now on. And the other one would be to say, And if any company of a certain size, you have to provide on-the-job training for a certain percentage, of the size of your workforce, so that all of these sort of apprenticeships open up for people, and so they start to go, well, actually, that sounds like a better deal than going off to university, because it looks like there's more of an opportunity. So some of that gets thrown back to companies. That seems like a sensible approach. It's just a couple of regulations that most people are suspecting.
I can't see that appearing in the Labour manifesto.
But why not?
Well,
Liz, what do they say?
I think you should both come and work for us, because I think those are great policies. Ooh. I mean, the point is, what we have to call on politicians, it's all very... So what politicians do is they immediately blame the victim, and they turn around and go, well, young people don't vote, so we've got to offer everything to old people. And so we need to turn it on its head and go, but what are you offering young people? They're not going to vote for you unless you offer them something. So what are you offering them? And that is going to be our strategy as we move into the next, as we move towards the general election, which, is whenever it turns up this year. And we would urge anybody listening to ask exactly that question of any politician, of any political party that turns up at their doorstep saying, how are you going to help our kids? Why have the Lib Dems decided to become a NIMBY political party in this general election? If you look at all of their social media, they are basically trying to say, oh, we're going to side with old people that don't want new housing.
So just going to taking the stance, the more traditional stance of a baby boomer, that young people have had it too easy. I was sitting having coffee the other day with avocado and toast, actually, funnily enough.
Excellent.
But we're able to, because we're older, so we're entitled to it. We're entitled to avocado.
You're turning into a snowflake.
And I was with some people just outside that baby boomer age. They were younger, and they were working with young people in their businesses, and they're saying, do you know what? They just will turn around and say, no, I'm not going to do that. It says, when we were their age, we did whatever we did to get ahead. So the attitude seems to be, for a lot of people now, it's just, no, I'm not going to do that. It's beneath me. And that seems to be, common in a lot of occupations these days. So it's something about... I don't know. I'm just saying what I'm not exposed to it myself. I'm just saying what I'm hearing.
Okay, well, international studies, surveys of early career entrants, surveys suggest that those younger workers are putting their ethics before remuneration.
Yeah.
They are expecting far higher working conditions. And of course, again, this is the middle classes. This is the lucky few. They are expecting better working conditions. They are expecting their employers to support their wish to volunteer in the wider community. They want to have more purpose in their working lives. And I think that is something to be celebrated. I'm Generation X. I graduated into full-on late 80s recession. I took the first job I could get. I worked all hours. I had no life. Do I want that for my children and my grandchildren? No. If we can improve the working conditions whilst obviously helping commercial organisations to thrive, then isn't that a win-win for everybody?
Well, it is. But I think this is more a case of I'm happy making the coffee, but I'm not going to clean the table, sort of thing.
I think, no, you're wrong. It's much more. It is that. Climate quitting, for example. I've done some research on that, where people say, look, I've been working for an oil company, but actually I don't want to. Big salary, but I'm not going to because of ethics. And I think there's much more than just, laziness, which I think Phil's slightly characterising it as.
In a word.
Well, it is, but there's also a feeling that they have things like their mental health to think about in a way that we probably didn't.
But okay, I know we'll move off this, but I'm just thinking about what I went through when I was a kid. So I was at university in the second year. I lived in the most horrendous accommodation with water that came down one of the walls in my bed. I had it tough, and it was up north because, so of course. But, but I put up with it because it was all just part, all my dad would say, it's good for the soul, lad.
Suffering is good for the... Well, but listen, we've got to draw this a bit to a conclusion, but to say what you've been saying is that there are the things that need to be done, and we're pretty much in consensus on that. And then saying, well, we got to find a mechanism within a political process to get these done by appealing to people to say, there's unfairness here, and to get the young people to do it and to get the politicians to appeal to the young people. Do you actually have much hope that any of this will change? Because you were reflecting on that fact that book written by Lord Willits, who, as you say, slightly compromised, but it was 15 years ago, and you would really struggle to see much change.
Also, David's solutions sit within a chummy idea that wealth is just going to pass down within families without kind of any conception of the fact that there might be poor families out there, David, that aren't going to get that wealth. So there's got to be structural reform in place, and a really easy way to do that. So, for example, all of this talk about the triple lock on the state pension, the triple lock on the state pension is going to increase by 20% over the last 2 years alone. It's going to increase by 10.1% last year, and I think it was 8.5. Oh no, sorry, Yes, anyway, 10.1%.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. The point is working age benefits have only gone up by around 6 or 7%. Meanwhile, student maintenance loans that poorest students rely on to be able to work, to be able to support themselves, have only gone up by 2.8%. Yeah. So what we need are intergenerational impact assessments to sit. I know it's all sounding a bit wonky, and I apologise, but to sit alongside all the other equality impact assessments. And that immediately removes the toxicity of these ridiculous political parties. I mean, Labour's come out, maybe it's expected to come out imminently and say that they're going to support the triple lock once again and turbocharge something that is having a huge cost to younger and future generations because it's obviously a Ponzi scheme. Whereas if you remove that toxicity from the process, so every politician can say, yes, we'd love to help you with that, but we've run it through this assessment tool and we know it wouldn't be fair to X, Y, and Z. So there are means of doing it. We can widen the tax base if we so wish to better fund our public services. We're all for widening that tax base, but that also has to be done equitably. We can build houses of all tenures, of all types in every location, as well. But we also need older people to understand if they're going to escape to the country, don't expect all the health and social care services to be able to go with you. I mean, people make...
Absolutely. Hey, I'm completely hearing you. And look, from an economics point of view, if you were to say, well, okay, everybody should start with the same position in life.
Yeah, wouldn't that
you'd have 100% inheritance tax, wouldn't you? You'd be saying you can pass on nothing from your generation. It's all going to be distributed to the younger generation. But also the whole thing about carrying debt and having that passed on, so future generations are burdened with that. I think I'm not a total proponent of modern monetary theory, but the one idea of modern monetary theory is that forget about the money. Look at the resources. What is needed now to deliver what is wanted now? How many people have you got? How much do you need to extract from the earth? Look at that as a present day situation, and don't worry about the debt because that's just money. It's resources that are the issue. And I don't know what the answer is, but there's something about the fact that we are artificially saying money from a previous generation is being paid for by the next generation for resources that we used back then. And we don't care about back then. We're thinking about now.
So you've got to look at the private finance initiatives that I think when we last looked at it, I think Professor David Parker, official government historian to private finance initiatives, I think he quantified about 700 PFIs that were established in the 90s and 2000s. And of course, it's all great using PFI to build the hospitals that were needed back then, but they're already crumbling.
And you've got headmasters now saying they're being forced to pay for mowing a lawn at the school by the terms of their contract rather than spending on classrooms.
Absolutely. So we need to be really careful about, the financial tools that we use for investment. But that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't be investing in a green transition and creating those green jobs that are going to be the ones that our children and grandchildren are going to want to work in. So I kind of sit between two stools on that. What we need to do is we need to fund our pension schemes properly. There are too many unfunded public sector pension schemes that the cost of which, it's all very well promising, very high pensions today, but the contribution rates haven't been enough for what people are still taking out of the system. So there needs to be reform there. And this all comes back to having a long-term view on policy.
That's it. A strategy is what you're talking about, Liz. That's what we need. Let's get one of those on.
It would be good to get them on, but I think we're not going to see a lot of that in the next few months coming up to elections, alas.
No.
But anyway, Liz,
touch the surface. Good to talk, Liz.
Liz, thanks so much for taking us through that, and we will see which of your ideas, if any, do get picked up in the campaigns. But thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
One thing we're saying is none of this is going to be answered in next week's, but is it next week or the week after? The budget in 2 weeks' time.
There's a budget soon.
Yeah, that's right. In a couple of weeks. But we're going to talk about it a week out, which is next week.
Yes.
Are you with us?
I am.
Yep. So what can we expect? And is Rishi heading in the right direction?
Well, yes, and
spoiler alert, probably not.
Well, and has Jeremy Hunt got the room? Which, there's lots of doubt about this. They put their figures in front of the OBR, trying to get a sense of whether these things work. Is there room to cut taxes? Is it wise anyway? If they did, would that mean cutting services? And already the feeling that services are cut back to the bare minimum.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's a budget with an eye on an election.
And it is a very strange idea that when you've got an economy that is slowing, so we've had 7 quarters of GDP per capita. So forget the headline GDP figure, the fact that we've seen it go down for 2 quarters.
Technical
Look at
recession.
GDP, technical recession. Look at it per capita. That's been on the slide for 7 quarters. So almost the last 2 years, the wealth related to the population of the economy has been on the slide. So that's a recession. So the idea that you are going to pull money out of a recession, pull money out of an economy when there's a recession on, seems like a very strange idea.
Well, so they say, putting money back into the economy by not taxing people so much, therefore they will go and spend it, and therefore the economy will recover. I mean, how the argument goes.
Yeah.
But we're going to explore what makes sense in all this.
Yeah. Next week on The Why Curve. Join us for that.
Bye.
The Why Curve.